It's my nerd world, and welcome to it, a Star Wars show. On this week's episode, I have runtimes for Tales of the Jedi, the Clone Wars era and before, new Disney Plus streaming show that's coming out next week. Andor is apparently what Lucas wanted all along. I'll give you my thoughts on Andor Episode 7 as well. I have some interesting background on Rian Johnson, not only continuing to talk about the potential of a new Star Wars trilogy directed by the director of The Last Jedi, but also the real story of Episode 9 and how Rian almost directed it. Entertainment Weekly comes to the defense of The Rise of Skywalker, speaking of Episode 9, and we have your listener feedback. Thank you so much for checking out the show. If you want to support My Nerd World, head on over to mynerdworld.net. Check out the podcast there, and of course, my EMBARK science fiction space opera series. I'll have more details on that at the end of the show.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now you're coming together. Is your undoing.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you.
Always.
My Nerd World.
It is My Nerd World, the Star Wars show. I'm your host, Jon Justice, and again, glad you are with this week's episode. Let's not waste any time and get into some of the news for this week.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
Now, while Disney Plus and Lucasfilm continue to serve us new episodes every week of Andor, and I'll have thoughts on that coming up, Episode 7, in my opinion, did not disappoint, even though it was quite a bit different from Episode 6. We do have a brand new series of Star Wars shows coming out. In the same animation style and done by Dave Filoni as the Clone Wars, we're going to get Tales of the Jedi. A series of shorts based in the Clone Wars and prior with stories of your favorite characters from the Clone Wars. We're going to get background on Ahsoka, Count Dooku, more from our heroes of Anakin Skywalker at the time and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The runtime length of Tales of the Jedi runs as follows: 17 minutes, 14 minutes, 13 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and 14 minutes. We knew that these were going to be shorts, and apparently, well, not apparently, screener copies have gone out. And from those that have had the opportunity to watch these Tales of the Jedi shorts, they're singing their praises. If you like Clone Wars, it sounds like you're going to love Tales of the Jedi and getting the background on especially Ahsoka and Dooku. Is something that I'm very much looking forward to. So, look, anytime we get something in the style of Clone Wars done by Dave Filoni, I'm up for it. So, and it'll be a nice change of pace from Andor. that is currently showing right now on Disney Plus. And so I'm looking forward to these episodes dropping very soon. And of course, I'll give you my thoughts once they are released on Disney Plus. And I believe that they're all coming out at exactly the same time. So it sounds like you can get a little over an hour or so of brand new content. So very much looking forward to that. Speaking of Andor, Mashable has an article that got me thinking a bit. How Andor fulfills George Lucas's plan for Star Wars. Gilroy's tale is bringing an original spin to what Mashable says is a flailing franchise, just as the creator's prophecy foretold. And it goes on to say, a long time ago, the creator of a galaxy far, far away wanted a bunch of big-name filmmakers to play in his brand-new sandbox. The people are there, the environment is there, the empire is there, and now other directors will start building on it. George Lucas told this to Rolling Stone in his first post-Star Wars interview back in 1977. He went on to say, it's a competition. Friends of mine will want to do a much better film. Like, I'll show George that I can do a film twice as good, and I think that they can. And I believe at one point in time, George Lucas had actually pointed to the James Bond franchise and how there were different directors for those films and how he wanted to model Star Wars after that. Now, that didn't quite come to fruition at the time. It did with the original trilogy, in as much as you had three different directors in George Lucas, Irving Kershner, and Richard Marquand. Of course, George Lucas played a heavy role in Return of the Jedi. Not as big a role, but still had Lucas's touch on The Empire Strikes Back. George would go on to, of course, direct the entirety of the prequel trilogy. It wasn't until handing the franchise over to Disney, selling it to Disney, that we ended up getting what we're getting now, and that is different visions from different directors. However, Andor is more in line, as Mashable lays out further in their piece, and I won't go into the rest of it, but Andor is more in line with, I think, what George Lucas really had in mind. It, in my view, seems as if what has happened with Star Wars and the content that we've received, it's been directors coming in, The Last Jedi being the oddball one, but directors coming in, putting their spin on Star Wars while still sort of very much adhering to a certain elements of storytelling that immediately fall into the Star Wars pantheon. Mandalorian to a lesser extent. That being said, Mandalorian definitely has the vibe of Star Wars, especially the original Star Wars. And Jon Favreau, the showrunner and writer for The Mandalorian and the writer for the Book of Boba Fett, has been very vocal about how he wanted it to feel more like the original trilogy. When you look at the sequel trilogy in what J.J. Abrams did, obviously the arc of that story, the protagonist in Rey, just so many comparisons and parallels to the original Star Wars. The Last Jedi is the one that I think really stepped further outside the box, probably closer to what George Lucas wanted than, say, what J.J. Abrams did. In my opinion, though, with what we did receive with the Rise of Skywalker, is very much a J.J. Abrams film, still has the Star Wars aesthetic and some fan servicey, doing that thing with my fingers in it, but is more true to, I think, what J.J. Abrams directs as opposed to what he did with The Force Awakens. And there may be a very specific reason for that, and I'll get into it here in a minute. I want to get through some more Rian Johnson news because it fits in more with the conversation that I want to present to you with regard to what potentially may have actually happened with Episode 9. And this is a story that I have not heard before that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. But as I talked about at length on last week's episode, what Tony Gilroy has done with Andor really, to me, is, as I mentioned, and this kind of plays into what George Lucas said back in 1977. An individual who came in, wrote a story, didn't have any preconceived notions of wanting to make it Star Wars-y, but then just put a Star Wars, layer on top of it. Whereas you could have taken this story that Tony Gilroy created and you could have placed it in multiple different timelines. You could have based it on Earth. You could have based it on a different fantasy, science fiction series. But he wrote this story that could have have easily been placed in different types of intellectual properties, but it's in Star Wars. And so it has Star Wars vehicles, Star Wars references, but much like George Lucas, when he made Star Wars, he wasn't going out saying, I have to make this like Star Wars. He was just making a science fiction movie that he would then call Star Wars. And then everything that he built the foundation. So while Tony Gilroy is writing a story that is based off of that foundation that George built, he didn't write the story with that in mind. So in my opinion, what Tony Gilroy and Andor has presented is something that is Star Wars, but is also very original, and I will say, pulls off something very unique because it does fit directly into Rogue One, but again, Tony Gilroy's hands are all over Rogue One as well. I'm interested to see as time goes on and we get further into wrap up season 1 of Andor, and then we wait for season 2, if the fandom for Andor will build. There was a couple of articles this week talking about how Andor wasn't doing as well as the other Disney streaming shows, although some of the outlets that had reported that have now come out and said that they don't necessarily agree with, or their information that they originally had wasn't completely accurate. So it may be doing better than they had let on before. Andor is different. It doesn't have much of the fantasy elements that we are used to in Star Wars. It is more of a political thriller. So I think people are going to be slow to find it. When you look at episode 7, which I very much enjoyed, again, it was more of just a slow drama. That was still, in my opinion, incredibly compelling. I think it's interesting as we watch Andor move through his story, still not ready or willing to fully commit to this rebellion, still out there trying to take care of himself, but now has found himself swept up, spoiler alert, at the end of the episode with the Empire, having been taken into custody, not for the heist on Eldani, but for being mistaken as being a part of some faction of rebellion on this Miami-esque planet. At the same time, we get this amazing scene of Mon Mothma at this dinner party talking with this other senator. And while it is just two individuals working through a crowd of people and talking, the writing on it, the directing on it, the acting on it was absolutely spot on and incredibly compelling. I've made the comparisons to, and I'll say the original Game of Thrones, not so much House of the Dragon, although it has that as well. But the original Game of Thrones, I remember, may he rest in peace, my friend Drew, making a comment before I had started watching Game of Thrones about how, these actors, they just chew the dialogue. It's all just meaty and compelling, and you're engaged in all of the conversation and the intrigue that takes place. And Andor is doing, in my opinion, very much the same thing. There's a tension there. There's a palpable tension that's being built. And it really is, for this fan, adding more context to the rebellion. When I go to watch Rebels, or I go to watch the original trilogy, there's going to be a weight added to what they are attempting to achieve. Watching a clip, I haven't watched the movie, since watching Andor, but watching just some clips through, watching other shows of the rebellion attack on the Death Star from episode Episode 4. My gosh, I'm totally spaced. From episode 4, it has more weight to it now. What this rebellion is doing, what it took to get him to that spot, and I'm really very much looking forward to seeing the continuing buildup of that. Eventually, Mon Mothma is going to break off from from the Senate, right, and join the rebellion fully, as we see her in Rogue One. So I'm really looking forward to watching that play out, and eventually, Andor is going to end up committing, to the rebellion, and I think we're going to get more from Andor that is probably going to flesh out how he is at the beginning of Rogue One, obviously, because the end of all of Andor is supposed to end right at the beginning of Rogue One. We see him killing a friend at the beginning of that film, and of course, at the end of Rogue One, he ends up dying. And so, I'm anticipating what Tony Gilroy has written as it relates to that character to get him to that spot in Rogue One, and what it will do to our perception of Andor once we arrive there. Needless to say, I'm really enjoying it. I am missing the fantasy elements, but that's not what Andor is about. I do hope we get more spaceships and stuff, because I'm just really into spaceships. And that final scene of going through the eye in Episode 6, watching it again is just, man, some of the best Star Wars in a long, long time, and certainly some of the best that they have put out on the streaming services.
We have a spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
All right, let's talk a little Rian Johnson, and we have some executive moves, some production moves of individuals inside Lucasfilm that I'll share with you here in a bit, and it plays into these rumors surrounding what actually happened with Episode 9. But first, we start here. AV Club has put out an article, and this isn't anything new. It's just Rian Johnson's being asked again about Star Wars, and he made another comment. So, Rian Johnson's first Knives Out sequel, Glass Onion, is coming to Netflix on December 23rd. Some theaters around the country will be showing it on November 23rd for a few days, actually. Another Knives Out sequel will be coming out at some point after that to complete Netflix's very expensive Knives Out trilogy. But that doesn't mean that Johnson has stopped thinking about the other trilogy that he's been cooking. The article goes on to say, we're talking about Star Wars as often as we are, with Variety taking a moment during its award circuit podcast recently to ask Johnson about Star Wars. Johnson's trilogy of the Star Wars spin-offs was announced even before The Last Jedi, a perfect film that Johnson said he's even more proud of these days, says AV Club, came out. But that was years ago, so Variety asked him if it was ever going to happen, and Johnson said, God, I hope so. To the direct question about whether it will get made, which doesn't instill much hope, but he did say that he has talked to Lucasfilm boss Kathleen Kennedy about it, and they're still talking about it. Still, he doesn't seem to think he'll be able to get to it until after his third Knives Out movie, whenever that will be, so it seems somewhat likely that it will just keep getting bumped further and further into the future. And, of course, this is very similar to the news that came out just a couple of weeks ago where he said something similar. And this goes back to the whole question of what's going to happen with Star Wars on the big screen at this point in time. I know they're still talking about the Taika Waititi movie, even though we do not have details beyond them talking about when it's supposed to come out. I believe that there is a Star Wars movie on the schedule for 2024 at this point in time, but whatever that is, at this point, your guess is as good as mine. So, with all that, apparently, Rian Johnson did almost do Episode 9. Now, I believe that it was originally intended that J.J. Abrams would do Episode 7, which became The Force Awakens, and that Rian was supposed to write Episodes 8 and 9, and whether or not he would direct both, I don't remember. I believe that was part of the thought at the time, but that had changed when they made the announcement that Colin Trevorrow would end up doing Episode 9 after the success of Jurassic World. Okay, so before we get to what I've heard and what was said recently on the MakingStarWars.net YouTube show, what Jason Ward has said, which I thought was really fascinating, we have to start with this other piece of news that came out this week. From Deadline, Michelle Rejwan is leaving her post as Senior Vice President of Live Action and Development and Production at Lucasfilm. She's transitioning back to being a full-time producer and has signed an overall deal with Lucasfilm and Walt Disney Studios. She will continue to be based out of the Lucasfilm office and will develop for both Lucasfilm and Disney. Now, Rejwan most recently served as the executive on Lucasfilm's series for Disney Plus, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor, and the upcoming series Willow for Disney Plus as well. In her new role, Rejwan will continue as executive producer on the current Andor and upcoming Willow series. She's also attached as producer on the upcoming Lucasfilm feature projects, including the Star Wars film, written and directed by Taika Waititi. So, prior to joining Lucasfilm and the executive team in 2019, Rejwan was part of the company's wider production family and served as producer on 2019's Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker and co-producer of 2015's The Force Awakens. Rejwan also spent 7 years at J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot in Los Angeles, where she served as co-producer on 2013's Star Trek Into Darkness, which I happen to love, and associate producer on 2011's Super 8, both directed by Abrams. That last piece of information is really, really relevant to what Jason Ward said on MakingStarWars.net. And this is what I found really interesting. What really happened with Star Wars Episode 9, and that is that Rian Johnson almost directed it. So according to sources that MakingStarWars.net said had given Jason Ward good information that had proved accurate in the past, these sources said that when the decision was made that Colin Trevorrow would not be directing Episode 9, they were, as we know, fully into production. There were multiple scripts written with a script, Duel of the Fates, that was slated to be shot. They moved forward with the blueprints, if you will, for the sets that would be built. We had, just a ton of concept art that we've all had a chance to see at this point in time. Basically, we've kind of seen everything that was developed for that particular film, but, obviously was never shot. Because of creative differences that Colin Trevorrow was having with the studio, and an abundance of different reasons, Colin Trevorrow was removed from doing that film. So the story goes that Rian Johnson, shortly after that decision was made, Rian Johnson was slated to come in within a few weeks to the studios where they would be working on Episode 9, and to, where they would be doing the film. He would then come in, decide which sets would and wouldn't be built, and then he would go and craft a new story and potentially direct it. So this would be Rian Johnson directing the sequel to The Last Jedi. The story goes that it was Michelle Rejwan who apparently went to J.J. Abrams and said, "You can do Episode 9, finish the story, but you have to make the December 2019 release date." Now, my recollection of the way the story was told initially was that Kathleen Kennedy had gone and asked JJ if he would do the movie, and he was, I believe that it went along. He was somewhat reluctant to do it. This, to me, makes a heck of a lot more sense. Rejwan, having worked at Bad Robot with J.J. Abrams on previous films, going to J.J. and said, "Hey, you can finish the story that you started, but in order for you to do it, you have to make that 2019 release date." And then, of course, J.J. decided to make the film, and we ended up with The Rise of Skywalker, which I personally love. What I find most interesting about this, of the what could have happened type of scenario, if Rian Johnson did move forward to do Episode 9, obviously it would have been incredibly different, right? Who knows what movie we would have gotten. But it wouldn't have been ready for that 2019 date. If she's telling JJ that you got to make that 2019 date, then that would say to me that Rian Johnson wasn't convinced that he could get the film done, and they would have to go and push the release date further out. But if they had to push that release date further out, if they weren't able to make that December 2019 date, think about what would have happened. I mean, that's right when the pandemic hit. We would have been in a Top Gun Maverick situation, and who knows what Disney would have done at that point in time. I mean, you could have had potentially Rian Johnson finishing episode 9, but by the time he gets it done, we're now in a theaters are shut down situation, and Disney has to make a decision, and who knows how long it would have been until they actually went and released the movie. Or would Disney have gone the route of what they ended up doing with Black Widow and done some combined Disney streaming service, along with a limited movie release window? Look, and these are all speculation. I just thought it was really interesting that we were really, really close to not getting a conclusion to the sequel trilogy, and potentially a situation where, Star Wars Episode 9, directed by Rian Johnson, may not have landed, until the time that Top Gun Maverick did not all that long ago. Not to mention that based off of the divisiveness in the reception of The Last Jedi, I mean, who knows what the commentary would have been surrounding the expectation of Episode 9 if that had been the case, and the length of time before the movie would have been released, and how, that controversy may have grown. Jason Ward on MakingStarWars.net also went on to add that from a fiscal standpoint, that The Last Jedi did just fine for the studio. Any of the controversies around the film were strictly coming from the fandom, and that was it. That the studio was... Lucasfilm and Disney were both very, very happy with the way that the film was received and the audience and critic scores that it had received. It was really only just that frustration that built up and kind of snowballed. And still to this day, you can't bring up The Last Jedi without somebody going and, talking about the controversy, saying how they love it or hate it. So, just in terms of backstories of what happened with that film, I found that really, really interesting of a what could have been.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, which brings us to this fun little article. This actually came out back on October 7th, written by Jessica Leon out of Entertainment Weekly, and she writes, "The Rise of Skywalker isn't a bad Star Wars film, and here is why. I always personally love a good defense of The Rise of Skywalker." So the article goes as follows. Justice for Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Whatever your troubles with The Rise of Skywalker may be, you can't deny the following moments in particular were great to watch on screen, right? Was making Rey a descendant of Palpatine a smart move? Should Kylo Ren have died at the end of his redemption arc? Was the ending to the 9-story film satisfying? Look, these are all subjective questions of which I know you listening have an opinion. I have my own as well. And even with the article writer saying you can't deny, you can deny these things. You can. It's still subjective. This is one person's opinion. But again, I always appreciate personally a good defense, again, of The Rise of Skywalker. So, what does she find in terms of moments that were fantastic to watch on screen? She starts off with Ben Solo's redemption arc. Ultimately, in the end, Kylo Ren and Ben Solo follow the footsteps of his grandfather, Darth Vader. The ending of The Rise of Skywalker, unfortunately, brought the end of Ben Solo as well. However, he was able to find the light side, giving us some of the best scenes and callbacks in the film. Not only do we get to see Ben reunite with his father Han, Harrison Ford, but we also get to see Solo in his genes shine through, from his running in to save the day when he realizes Rey is in trouble, to the little shrug he gives the Knights of Ren. There's no denying he was a Solo through and through, she writes. And again, it's still subjective. Babu Frick and Dio. We're going to get some more Babu Frick in Mandalorian Season 3. I'm excited about that. I like that character. At times, it felt like The Rise of Skywalker was introducing too many characters and not giving us enough time to really appreciate each and every one. But there were two who definitely stood out. Babu Frick gave us some of the most comedic dialogue, even without even saying a real word. The droid smith made such a lasting impression, as I just mentioned, that fans can expect to see him again in The Mandalorian Season 3. Every Star Wars fan knows that droids are some of the greatest parts of the franchise, and the introduction of Dio was no different. Hearing him say, "I miss her," when Rey exiled herself on Ahch-To, tugged at all our heartstrings. If you haven't watched any of the behind-the-scenes extras on the DVD or Blu-ray, and they're also available on the streaming platform for The Rise of Skywalker, I really encourage you to do so. The Skywalker Saga, I think that's the documentary name. It's about 2 hours, if not 2 hours more, is absolutely fantastic. And actually covers a lot of the original trilogy in the documentary itself. There's also a few smaller documentaries, and one particularly about the droids, and they show a deleted scene of Dio when he keeps passing by the camera over and over again during this scene with Rey. It is absolutely hysterical. I would encourage you to go and find that. Again, if you're on the Disney streaming app and you just go into the extras, you'll see the one documentary about Dio on there. All right, the article goes on to talk about Kylo Ren and Rey's lightsaber battle. Everyone has their problems with Revenge of the Sith, but we can all agree that it gave us one of the best lightsaber fights from the entire franchise. Oh, I'm sorry, Rise of Revenge of the Sith, Rise of Skywalker. Everyone has their problems with Rise of Skywalker. The setting and physical aspect of the scene was breathtaking, and the performances given by both Ridley and Driver were nothing short of amazing. Rey's backwards flip, Leia reaching out to Ren during the fight, Rey using her healing powers, leading Ren to realize that he was ready to join her fight. The entire sequence was more than satisfying, entertaining, and there was no pulling your eyes away from the screen during those 4 minutes. I can't believe it's only 4 minutes long. I love that scene as well, but I would have pegged it as being longer. I'll have to time it the next time I watch it. The return of Star Wars faves. Going into this film, we also knew it would be the last time that we saw Carrie Fisher in the role of General Leia Organa, which was bittersweet to say the least. In addition to our favorite Star Wars character making her final return, we also saw Billy D. Williams return as Lando Calrissian, and help the new crew on their journey to destroy Palpatine. He helps them find a clue that leads them to the Death Star and ultimately a new Sith Wayfinder, holocron. Fan favorite Han Solo is also a vital part of the storyline this time around, giving Kylo Ren the push he needed to reclaim his identity as Ben Solo. He may have just been a memory, but he was there when Ben needed him most. And then they write, Chewbacca finally got a medal. I never really cared much about this. I know there's a lot of fans that did, but it never really seemed to bother me. Diehard Star Wars fans noticed the A New Hope medal the second it made the appearance in the Rise of Skywalker trailer. Keep wanting to say Revenge of the Sith. Leading us to believe why the filmmakers decided to bring it back into the story. Audiences were pleasantly surprised when at the end of the battle, Maz Kanata presented Chewie with the medal saying, "This belongs to you." It may have taken well over 40 years, but our favorite co-pilot finally got the award that he deserved. For me, the reason why I love The Rise of Skywalker, it's the culmination of what came before The Force Awakens, what came before in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. The movie wastes no time, provides us with fresh locales and new versions of old locales. The action is there from the drop. The stakes are presented early. The adventure immediately follows. And the combination of friends on a quest with the deeper struggle between the dual protagonists that wraps it up in a completely satisfying ending. Look, I finished my EMBARK story before before The Rise of Skywalker came out, but there's a lot of comparisons in The Rise of Skywalker to that original story that I wrote. I mean, I'll just happenstance, but it's one of the reasons why I love the story as well, because when I watch The Rise of Skywalker, it reminds me of the story that I wrote with my dual protagonists and friends that are on a journey and a quest and the action and space battles and all. From a personal standpoint, I have this bizarro kind of connection because there are parallels with this movie that I also have parallels with the book that I wrote, and so it's very meaningful for me. But as always, what do you think? TalkShowNerd at gmail.com with any of what I've talked about on the show this week. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. And of course, you can always leave a comment up on YouTube if you happen to be watching there. All right, let's get into some listener feedback.
I need someone Show me my place in all this.
It always puts a smile on my face. Whenever anybody writes into the show, it puts a smile on my face. So let me say that up front. However, I love hearing from people just all around the planet. I just think that's cool. I've been doing my Depeche Mode podcast as of late. They have a new album coming out and a tour next year. So I've been hearing from people just all over Earth. And I really get a kick out of it. I love the connectivity that we can have through these common bonds of things that we love. And just talking about things in a positive way makes me happy. This listener feedback I've been really looking forward to sharing on the show. It comes from Danny Phillips from Devon, England, who writes this. I really enjoy your podcast, mostly because your views on Star Wars mirror my own, particularly your love for the rise of Skywalker and the fantasy elements. I think Andor is a wonderful show, visually stunning, masterfully written, and refreshingly mature. Great characters and dialogue. While I'm watching it, I'm enthralled. Episode 6 was phenomenal. But the thing is, I don't think I'll ever watch it again. Once I've seen an episode, I'm good. The rewatchability factor isn't there. I don't disagree, Danny, but I'll get into more of that in a moment. By contrast, I've watched The Rise of Skywalker pretty much on loop since it came out on home video. Same for The Force Awakens. Why is that? I think it's because The Rise of Skywalker and The Force Awakens give me that pure Star Wars sugar rush. Lightsabers, the Force, Jedi, Sith, alien creatures, fantastical worlds. They inspire the same feelings of childlike wonder that The Return of the Jedi gave me as an awestruck 5-year-old in the cinema. If it helps, I love J.J. Abrams' style of movie making, kinetic, colorful, and crowd-pleasing. Yeah, you're a brother from another mother. I completely agree. J.J. Abrams just makes infinitely rewatchable films. I love The Last Jedi. Don't misunderstand. The Last Jedi is not, for me personally, I know there are going to be people, you listening, that feel differently, but for me personally, if I'm going to watch The Last Jedi, I got to sit down and watch The Last Jedi. That's not to say I don't with the same for The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker, but those movies I can just put on and go. You know, I gotta kind of settle in for The Last Jedi, much in the same way you have to settle in for Andor too. To which Danny continues. Andor, on the other hand, comes from a grittier, more grounded school of Star Wars that the majority seem to prefer these days, but often leaves me cold. Technically impressive, but lacking the Star Wars special sauce. I agree with that too, and that's why that Episode 7 meant so much, because that Episode 7 probably had as much of that special sauce so far. Was the only episode that really had that real special sauce was that episode. Rewatching that episode is one that I can go back and know I can watch again and again and again, because it kind of had that well-rounded balance of everything that you're talking about. Danny goes on to say, I guess my point is that I hope Lucasfilm doesn't get blinded by the success of Andor and follow the same template for subsequent movies and shows. Don't ignore the elements that made people like me fall in love with Star Wars in the first place. Keep up the great works. Many thanks, Danny Phillips. Yeah, I tend to agree, and I don't think that Lucasfilm is going to. With everything they put out so far, they really seem to be trying different things out, much in the same way that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has. I'll rewatch Andor, but much like The Last Jedi, I've got to be in the mood to sit down and rewatch to rewatch Andor. Apart from that episode, I think I may have said 7, episode 6. Apart from that episode 6, The Eye. Andor is a show that when I'm working on my radio show, I can throw on in the background, just kind of let it run, and kind of pick up on it knowing that I've watched it already. Or if I'm just in the mood to sit down and chew on some Star Wars for a bit, I can watch it. But I'm with you. I will continue when I want to watch Star Wars to go back to the theatrical releases over and over and over again, or The Mandalorian, to a lesser extent, The Book of Boba Fett, just because of the quality, and to an even lesser extent, Kenobi. I wish that we had the same type of production quality for Kenobi, and certainly writing, that we got for Andor. I know that they are very different, but boy, just Andor is so beautiful to watch, and I think, if anything, I hope that Lucasfilm moves forward with the same production value of Andor more than anything else. Give me what Danny mentioned here, the sugar rush of lightsabers, Force, Jedi, Sith, alien creatures, fantastical worlds. I'll add in the space battles to that, right? Give me that in with Andor production, and I'm all in. But yeah, going back to J.J. Abrams, I'll never forget the day that it was announced that they were going to make Episode 7, and somebody had asked me if you were going to pick a director for Episode 7, who would it be? And I said J.J. Abrams, and how excited I was when that actually ended up being the case. Still love that movie, by the way. As a matter of fact, in my Star Wars watching this weekend, maybe I will. I'm behind on my Halloween movie watching. Every Halloween season, I have a series of movies that I watch, and I'm a little bit behind on them just because life gets in the way. Bram Stoker's Dracula right now is top of the list. Gotta watch that one. All right, before I let you go, if you are new to My Nerd World, the Star Wars podcast, and you like to read, you already love science fiction and Star Wars, but if you like to read, I hope you will pick up my space opera science fiction series, EMBARK, where you can follow a ragtag squadron of pilots and one reluctant hero on a journey of survival from Earth to the far reaches of space as they fight for humanity's future among the stars. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with sci-fi. It's written for adults, but great for ages 11 years old and older. You can buy EMBARK Book 1 today. All 7 books complete the series, available in hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. Yes, I'm still working on the audiobook for Book 7. I hopefully will get it done soon. But you can pick up books 1 through 6 and 7 in ebook, hardcover, and paperback, and books 1 through 6 in audiobook, produced and narrated by yours truly. If you like your science fiction space opera filled with epic action, a little bit of romance, EMBARK is perfect for you. Go to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, Jon, Jon Justice, or just head on over to mynerdworld.net. All right, I'll be back again next week. We'll talk Andor Episode 8 and whatever news happens to transpire between now and then. As always, I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you are safe. I'll talk to you again real soon. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.